Okay, hello and welcome to the Wednesday night live stream. Today is February 27th, 2019, and I am your host, Dana Morningstar. This is a live stream that we do every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and it goes for about 3 hours. The topic is basically identifying, understanding, and healing from narcissistic abuse. So if you are new here, welcome. And if you are returning here, welcome. So how is everybody doing tonight? Anything new and exciting in your world? Anybody get hit with that winter storm like we did in Michigan? Oh my gosh. My phone wasn't working for half of the day today, and it's just been absolutely chaotic. So while people are hopping on, let me see here. I saved some quotes. This is a fantastic quote that somebody posted on YouTube comments. It's from Wen Ling, and she says, we're talking about criticism, and I had heard this quote the other day that said, don't take criticism from a person that you wouldn't take advice from. And I just thought that was so spot on. And so she had said, well, to be considered a valid criticism, it must contain 3 elements. 1, the person must know and understand fully what your goal is. 2, the person must have experience in accomplishing the goal you are trying to attain themselves. 3, the criticism must in some way be helpful. Unless these 3 elements are present, it is not valid criticism. And I just love the way that she spelled that out. She is so spot on. So that was, I'm going to start going through the comments and taking pictures of stuff that just really stands out over the week and then share them in here. And actually, before I forget, book club is tomorrow night. So book club, 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We are discussing the book, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Fantastic book, a little bit triggering, but I think it's really going to make for an excellent conversation. So I hope you guys can be there for that. Okay, let's see what's going on in the chat. Kimberly says, I finally made it live, my first time here, though I've been listening for over a year. Well, welcome, Kimberly. We're excited to have you here. High quality distraction. Hello, Sherry. Tanitria, Blue Moon, Lorette, Seafin, J-Cat, Sashiko, hello. Van Queer, Soft Breezy Day, the Lexi, Markella, Liz, Hooray, Stronger in Time. Welcome, welcome, everybody. Vaughn says, hey. Hey, Vaughn. Let's see. Sherry asks, how can you tell if your spouse is a narcissist like his father, or if it's just learned numerous behaviors from him? And if they're like talking to a brick wall when there's a disagreement, is there hope? That's a great question. I guess I would approach it in trying to kind of figure out, is this person just, incredibly narcissistic, or are they a narcissist? That kind of detracts from, I think, the bigger problem at hand, which is they have all of this problematic behavior. And when you argue with them, it's like talking to a brick wall, and they're not open to discussing anything, and they just shut communication down. And, if they're not motivated to sincerely change, then there's your answer. Then they're not going to change. And the only way that we know if a person's sincerely motivated to change is if they actually change. So a lot of times manipulators will say all the right things, but if anything, they don't change. Or if they do seem to change, they just get better at hiding their behavior. So that can take some time to really see like what's going on. Like, have they actually changed, or have they just gotten better at hiding their behavior? But if you've been married, this is the thing. It's really difficult for any of us to change, even if we really want to, even if we understand that our behavior is a problem. And it's even change isn't possible if a person doesn't admit that they have a problem. But even admitting or that awareness that a person has a problem, change is still kind of an uphill climb. And so I think because of that, it's important that you kind of turn inward and figure out, okay, well, now what am I going to do? How much longer am I going to spend trying to get this person to change? Or, what are you going to do? Are you going to try to stay in this marriage and just try to make things work? Or are you at a point where it's like, okay, I just need to leave. I can't handle this anymore. And that's a decision that you will have to make. But, it's important that we have a line in the sand and have some sort of deal breakers for these things. Okay. Sherry says, yeah, thank you. That helps. He promised to change and he did for a time, but it seems like after 6 or 7 years, we're almost at that same point again. Yes. And that is incredibly frustrating. And if you're able to have the kind of conversations with him and just kind of lay it out and just say, hey, you know what? These are some of the things that we discussed. And I feel like, just like you said, I feel like after 6 or 7 years, we're back at square one again. And I just don't know how much more I can do of this. Like, this is a big thing. Because here's the thing with change, because it's difficult. And because most of us, we have to stay in a constant state of motivation to change. And that state of motivation for us to change generally means that we have to be in pain. Something has to be causing us. There has to be that driving force, So like if you want to lose weight, it helps to put up some of the worst pictures of yourself on the fridge. Or if you've got this goal of, I've got to squeeze into this dress by this date, you have a calendar that you're marking it off and you're putting it where you can see it every single day. It's that reminder of this is a priority. So again, like if you can kind of see how difficult it is for any one of us to stay on track, if you've got a person who really, isn't sincerely motivated, or they don't have a problem with their behavior, then they don't have that pain. They don't have that level of continual motivation that's going to be necessary for them to change. So it's a challenge. Okay. Sandra says, how do you know if trauma therapy is helping or not? I don't like the blank slate format. She's all about feelings in the moment. I learn more from you. Well, I think different therapists in general have different approaches to different things. It kind of depends on, I think, what a person's needing at that time. For me, what I needed back then was more of this like psychoeducation component. I needed to understand manipulation. I needed to understand narcissists and sociopaths. I needed to really understand that in order to be able to move forward, because it's really difficult. It was difficult to move forward anyhow, but it's really difficult if you don't have that fundamental understanding. So, because I felt the exact same way. I'm like, I feel like I'm following Moses through the desert. Like, do you know where you're going? Because I don't know where to go. And I need somebody to help guide me. But some people, if she's more feelings based, and that's the time where you're like, okay, this is a great time to just be validated. And I think there's a lot of benefit from just having that one-on-one time with a person where they can just hold space for you for an hour, and that you're not being judged, that it's all about you. Like, you can talk about things, you can cry about things, you can say things that you would never tell another person. I just think that can be a very cathartic experience, just that in and of itself. So if you're kind of finding some pieces here and there, you're like, okay, I'm getting some clarity on YouTube and I've got this therapist over here and I'm getting this piece here. Sometimes we have to kind of cobble together what works for us and then, just try to assemble the puzzle that way. So I think it's very difficult to find because this topic, because manipulation, because understanding all of this, because PTSD, there's so many components to this. I think it's really difficult for one person to have all of the pieces, all of the answers for anyone else. I've heard from a lot of people, even on YouTube, where they're like, oh, I go to this channel for these certain things, and I go to this other channel for these other certain things. And I'm a big fan of that. I think it's important because how I might phrase my message might not resonate with somebody, but they might really get the information or the validation that they need from another YouTuber or another person. So, sometimes it is just multiple sources of information. Yeah, Dave says, yeah, it's a process. It requires multiple levels of healing that takes time as we learn and process. Okay, let's see. Yeah, High Quality says about change. Someone who says they've changed does not get a pass. In my opinion, he or she will only let in over time, but behind others. Wait, you lost me there. I'm confused by this. I think what High Quality is trying to say is that basically a person, it's all about actions. It's not about words. So if they're saying, yeah, I've totally changed, well, then their behavior will show you that. So, I just wouldn't look to their words, but I'd look to their actions. Okay, let's see. Aubrey says this teaching that says stop trying to be happy and to be happy seemed to work for me. It was the expectation of trying to get to something I never had. And when I let go, I experienced true happiness. I don't know if I'm missing part of the conversation here, but I will just chime in that I agree with that. One of the most significant books for me in my healing was The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. I really feel like that book saved my life. It was what I needed to read at that point in my life. And it was all about being in the present moment and understanding that kind of depression oftentimes tends to happen when we're looking backwards, when we're focused on like regret or remorse or something that's already happened. And anxiety tends to come from looking in the future. And all there really is this present moment, and really the importance of just getting grounded in that. So yes, I think grounding, when a person's been through anything traumatic, because trauma just pulls you into the past and into the future. And it's that continual like cycle of anxiety and depression and overwhelm and all of these things. And so it can be very difficult for a person to live in the present moment because the present moment feels so uncomfortable. But being grounded in it and realizing like you're here right now, like you can breathe, being in your body, being comfortable within yourself, then you can start to move forward. There's a lot of healing and validity that comes from that, or validation that comes from that. Tesla asks, what does a narcissist let us know about ourselves, our motivation? Well, I have found in my own life that, and I think for many people this is true as well, when we have such a problematic person that finds their way into our lives, and again, this can happen to anybody. It's not just, because a person had a bad childhood or, for any of these other reasons, anybody can get taken in by these people. When we let somebody like that into our inner circle and they do a horrendous amount of damage, in time, one of the biggest lessons that I think we can learn from this is, well, there's seriously so many. It's important to start examining how they were able to get in. And this is really more of kind of this, I would say, like second wave of healing. The first, we talked about this the other night, like there's kind of these three different rabbit holes that people go down when they move forward into healing. The first one is just this understanding of, oh my goodness, there's people with crazy, completely psychotic, outrageous, inappropriate behavior that walk the earth, and I can't see them coming because nobody can. Sometimes they can be attractive, they can be spiritual leaders, they can come in as a friend, they can come as, a significant other, they can be a parent. They play any role. So just that awareness of, oh my goodness, this actually exists. Because we all tend to kind of think, well, this is something that happens to other people. And then we realize, oh, no, okay, this can happen to me too. That's kind of that first level of awareness. And that second level of awareness is, oh my goodness, I'm seeing a lot of this problematic behavior everywhere. And then they start connecting the dots to, because most normal, decent people tend to kind of give other people the benefit of the doubt, and they just gloss over a lot of stuff that they see. That person had a bad childhood. Oh, they were tired. Oh, they have a new baby. Oh, it's their culture. Oh, it's this. Oh, it's that. Oh, on and on and on. And when you strip away all of those excuses and you see behavior for what it is, it's terrifying. So that's kind of like that second wave of they're out there. And then people start connecting it of like, well, actually, there was this really significant relationship that just decimated my life, and it brought me to a channel like this. And now that I'm going through this and I'm trying to understand everything, they start looking around and they're like, well, you know what? Actually, I've had quite a few people in my life that have had problematic behavior. Maybe not to the extent of what brought you here, but you're like, oh my gosh, that's my father. I always knew something was off, but I kind of glossed over it for any number of reasons. And actually, I had a good friend in college who was very much this way, or a roommate in college, and they were absolutely awful, and this, that, and the other. And they start seeing kind of behavior for what it is. And then the third rabbit hole that people go down to, and again, this often takes time because having your life destroyed is an incredibly emotional time. It's emotionally devastating, and that pain leaves a person feeling very raw and profoundly broken. So this third rabbit hole happens in time. And unfortunately, I don't think that most people get to this level. It took me going around this mountain and getting hurt quite a few times before. If you've been here, I have an insatiable need. I have an insatiable curiosity and drive to learn and to understand. And so here I am, totally open to trying to make sense of everything, and it still wasn't making sense. So like I said, took me quite a few times. But that third level is understanding how they got in. And I kind of view it as like checking the weather stripping around your doors and your windows. Because we all tend to think that we have good boundaries and standards and deal breakers until they're pushed to this degree, until they've just been bulldozed like this. And then people are left scratching their head and trying to figure out what happened. So a lot of the insights that come from like that third wave of insight is, oh my gosh, okay, yes, the repeating pattern of all of these people has been whatever it might be for you. You were really lonely. You had walked around feeling unloved or unimportant for a long time. Maybe you were new to town. Maybe you had grown up around this behavior, and so it never registered as a problem. It was just, this is how everybody was. There's any number of reasons that a person continues to get pulled into this. The love bombing is a big one. The rushing of intimacy is a big one. It's very easy. Again, I think the vast majority of people misread that kind of stuff as sincere. And so there's just a lot of lessons we can squeeze out from this. And I'm not saying I would want to repeat any of this, but at this point in my healing, it was It was definitely a wake-up call that I didn't ever want, but in many ways, I don't think I would be where I am today with a level of self-awareness that I have had this not happened. I really needed to have my life completely blown apart, and I needed to lose everything in order to sit there among the rubble and be at that crossroads of, okay, am I going to sink or am I going to swim? And if I'm going to swim, if I'm going to rebuild my life, then now I'm going to do it consciously. I'm going to consciously make the decision piece by piece. What is now going back into my life? So there's a lot of these things, and this isn't just me. This is a universal, I think, a universal experience for people that are rebuilding after an experience like this. So lots of insight if you can hang in there. One of the book that I'm working on right now, at the end of it, there's a whole chapter on like what healing from manipulation, what healing from narcissistic abuse really looks like. And it covers all of this and kind of some different stages in each of these stages that people tend to go through, because that's another thing. When a person's in this and you're trying to move forward and heal, and they don't have, and you have PTSD and you're totally confused by everything that you're experiencing, and you just feel hypervigilant, and you're starting to wake up to what problematic behavior is, it's so easy to doubt yourself and to just think, I must just be, it's due to my past experiences. I'm not seeing things correctly, because you also have all these other people around you that are telling you, oh, you need to love like you've never been hurt. You need to forgive and forget. Commitment is forever. Da, 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 da. There's all of this like well-intended bad advice that people are throwing at you. And so this is one of the main reasons that people never get to that third level of self-awareness, because then you're just pulled back into this dysfunction by well-intended people with bad advice. Because I just so strongly believe this. I have yet to meet a person who has come across to me as really self-aware and with a really solid, healthy understanding of boundaries, standards, deal breakers, self-love, all of that hasn't gone through this. I haven't met anybody. It's in the crazy thing with this too is it only takes one piece of well-intended bad advice to get a person off the road and tangled up in the bushes. That's what's so difficult to try to navigate through this whole path of healing. So there's just a lot. There's a lot that can be learned from this. Did that kind of answer your question? Sorry if that was kind of a tangent. Yes, Markella says you have to rebuild yourself after a narcissist, but it can be done. Yes, it absolutely can be done. And what's cool about that is not only can you rebuild, but I get goosebumps when I say this because it's so true. And I just want you to believe this so much. Your life can be even better than before. So it's not like you have to rebuild and get back to this baseline of what was normal before. That's what's so cool about that's the upside of having your whole world imploded like this or exploded like this. So you really can move forward and be like, okay, now piece by piece, what's going to happen in my life? Where in your question, you're questioning everything, which can be a very difficult thing to do, but it's so important. How do you feel about if you're religious, how do you feel about certain aspects of your religion? How do you feel about certain boundaries with different friends and family? And how do you feel about different relationships? And here's one thing, if you're in that rebuilding stage, I think Marie Kondo just sums this up so perfectly. She basically asking yourself, does this spark joy? Like, move in that direction. So if you're overwhelmed with where to go, your guiding star needs to be valuing your safety and sanity. That always, always, always needs to be factored into any decision that you're making. That's your North Star. Okay. And what's going to be pulling you in that direction is what is sparking joy for you. Because what's for you is a very individual, unique thing, but you will know because it feels nourishing. And if it doesn't feel nourishing, then that's a sign to kind of pause and back up and think about, okay, is this why am I working at this job? Why do I have this person as a friend? I always leave, I'm exhausted. They're irritating. There's no benefit. There's nothing here. We've been quote unquote friends for 5 years, 10 years. And that's why we keep being friends. Like, that's not a good reason, right? So just really examining, why are you doing what you're doing and how much of what you're doing truly sparks joy? And if nothing sparks joy, then that's a huge sign to then go find some stuff that sparks joy. So I think Agata, I think you just sent a live stream donation. Thank you. And she's sending me text messages. Okay, I had my phone upside down. Let me go through these here. Okay, so thank you for that. Wise Co says, does trauma tend to bring out a psychotic break with a narcissist? Well, I think trauma can bring out a psychotic break in pretty much anybody. The stress of it all can definitely be too much. So I guess it depends on what you're asking. Like were they always like, is that what happened? Are you asking like, is that what happened to them? That they had some sort of trauma and then that made them what they are? Or is it they've always been erratic, dramatic, and emotional, and then they had an additional trauma onto that, and now they're even worse? I'll be curious to hear what you have to say of that. Generally, it's understood, like with a person that's diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder or antisocial personality disorder, that these kinds of things, there's a nature component and a nurture component. So oftentimes, with narcissism, it's kind of thought they either have a parent that's really trying to live through them, so they never have their own identity, or that there's some sort of abuse or neglect or trauma going on at home. Something happened to where that they haven't really ever formed an authentic self. And so instead, they've put up all of these masks and all of these fronts because they're hollow inside. So there is no sense of self. And because of that, there is no sense of self-esteem. But what's interesting is, though, people, if a person grows up in a home like that, they can also go the other direction and so instead of becoming hyper self-focused, I guess you would say, they tend to become hyper others-focused. Because if you have these parents who are continually, whether or not they mean to or not, if they're continually invalidating, and you grow up feeling like your wants and needs don't matter, then you either, hyper correct that, and that whole narcissism develops because you just feel so inferior that you're trying to prove to yourself that I am the best. Narcissism happens. The opposite of that is more on like the codependent side of the spectrum. I know that word's very emotionally charged. Ross Rosenberg talks about this in, I think, a much more accurate and compassionate language, where he talks about it in terms of like a self-love deficit disorder. And that really does happen. So if you've grown up and you're like, okay, your wants and needs don't matter, the message is you've got to put everybody else first and yourself last. Because if you make yourself a priority, then you're being selfish. Well, you can see how that can be taken to an extreme. And so then if a person, then as that person gets older and then they start dating and they keep thinking, well, everybody else has to come first because that's just the compassionate, good thing to do, they tend to stay with really rotten people or people with really rotten behavior because they feel obligated to fix them, to help them, to stay with them. They feel like if they set boundaries that they're being judgmental or rude, all of these things. The other side of that narcissism, so either you have a parent that completely is invalidating and abusive and neglectful, or they're overly they're spoiling the child. So then that child grows up thinking, hey, I should be the center of the universe. Only my wants and needs matter. That's kind of how it's, I think, currently understood. But let me see. Stacy had asked, does anyone else feel like social media has created a whole new type of narcissism and opened up a much easier pathway for narcissists? I was just talking about this earlier today, and here's my take on it, is anything out there that can be used as some sort of tool to further anything. So for example, like money doesn't change a person. It just makes them more of what they already are. Technology doesn't change a person. It just makes them more of what they already are. So if a person if they're feeling insecure already, and then they start getting into YouTube or, whatever, Facebook or what have you, then that insecurity, because it's not addressed. These things don't go away, right? Like if our insecurities aren't addressed, then this stuff, it just exacerbates at this huge level, because you're out there like we've never experienced before in history. So it's really kind of a scary thing, because you've got here's the other thing that's scary to it, is the people that are the most entertaining to watch, especially on YouTube, tend to be the ones that are the most dramatic. And that's an interesting thing that I've noticed lately. And it's almost like its own Black Mirror episode. It's really disturbing, where you've got these people that get famous basically for their really dysfunctional behavior. And then as they get older, they start really kind of becoming more introspective. And then they start realizing, wow, okay, yeah, I'm a hot mess and I'm crying on the kitchen floor and like nothing is working for me. And it can be very difficult, that added layer of difficulty for that person to change, because they're rewarded by their dysfunctional behavior and it's become like their brand. So if they actually move forward to change, there's that risk of losing your audience, losing your job. It's weird where we are with technology. But the cool thing is, it can also, if a person has that level of self-awareness, because so much tends to come to the surface, especially if you're on YouTube, in a way, it's kind of cool, because so many things about you are brought to your attention, whether you want that or not, they're brought to your attention. And so in a way, it can almost be kind of this crash course into therapy, but it can also be a really great way to like drive a person into a really deep depression. So it's that tightrope. Like, for example, for me, when I have to be in the right mind space in order to go and check my YouTube comments. And I'm very fortunate. This channel, 9.9 out of 10 comments are loving and supportive and amazing. But every now and again, there's that one that cuts to the core, and sometimes there's truth in it. And sometimes they're just, trolls, which that's easy to just discount. But the ones that have a kernel of truth, but they're just wrapped in a really hard shell, that can be hard. That can be really difficult to take. So, but yeah, interesting where we are. Sherry says, any advice for those who are just now figuring out that narcissism is the problem? Well, I think the first step is to really get clear with yourself on like, where are your boundaries, standards, and deal breakers? And if this person is in your inner circle, kind of, again, using that North Star of your safety and your sanity, what needs to happen in order for you to restore peace in your life? So, and depending on how problematic this other person is, that might mean any number of things. It might mean setting some boundaries and making it to where they're not coming over to your house all the time, or that you're not seeing them, or that you're not answering the phone for them every single time they call, or that if you work with somebody like this, you might have to quit your job. If they're really dangerous and deadly, you might have to move. So it's really kind of figuring out, what do you need to do in order to restore peace in your life? And I would say it also helps to start understanding, to truly understand that there's just people out there in the world who lack empathy and they lack remorse, and there is no getting through to them. It's important that everybody understands that not everybody out there is like you. So they don't have the same moral compass as you. They might not even have a moral compass. That your toolkit, I guess this would be the primary lesson, okay? Your toolkit for the way that you are going through life and that you're interacting with other people does not apply when you're dealing with somebody that has this level of destructive behavior. And don't get caught up on the name, narcissist, sociopath, psychopath, peanut butter sandwich, whatever you want to call them, it doesn't matter. It's the behavior that matters. So understanding that if it feels like you're continually talking to a brick wall, if more communication only adds more confusion to things, if they're continually gaslighting you, they're denying that they said something, they're blaming you, they're doing all of these things, that there are people that walk the earth that have a complete inability to be accountable for any of their own behavior. And it's not there. You can't be reasonable or rational with an unreasonable, irrational person. That's just an exercise in crazy making for you. So that's a hard thing for most people to fully wrap their mind around. That can take some time. And I think just understanding kind of the different ways that they operate can help to alleviate a lot of that. My first book, it's called Start Here, and it's a crash course on understanding kind of everything about narcissistic abuse, like their different behaviors, a lot of kind of all of the terminology, really, that helps with understanding this. Frequently asked questions. It's just kind of literally like, just start here. Like, this is a really solid place. If you're trying to understand what happened, read that book, and that'll get you caught up to speed. And then you're going to have a whole different next level layer of questions. So if you're interested in my books, you can find them across the internet. Dana Morningstar, anywhere out there. Let's see. Jack Lumen asks, I would like to know more about how Dana found out about Ross Rosenberg. I am looking for more coaches that are men. Well, right now, as it stands on YouTube, I think the people that talk about this topic, or I should say the people, when I first started making videos, the people that talked about this topic were kind of few and far between. There was maybe only, I don't even know, 5 people, if even that, at the time. And so because, like, you're in a pretty small group of people, not that, we're great friends or anything, but, people would email, hey, I saw that you're doing this. This is cool. Like, we should talk, or what have you. So, I should contact Ross and see if I know he would do an interview or a talk about his book. But yes, finding coaches for men is difficult. I agree. Yes, Crystal also says, yes, need to look up Pia Melody. Dana highly recommends her. Yes, I do. I absolutely adore Pia Melody. I have, maybe not so jokingly, said that I am going to get a tattoo of a heart with an anchor on it that says Pia Melody, because I love her that much. But I don't want her to put a restraining order on me. So that's the only thing that's stopping me from doing that. Okay. Let's see. Let me scroll up here. Yeah. Camilla says, a lot of people love their abusers and hope dies last. It absolutely does. And it's heartbreaking. And so much of it is, it's just so, we don't understand, normal, decent people don't understand, like, how can this be a thing? Because we tend to go through life thinking, well, yeah, we know that there's dangerous and destructive people out there, but surely we'll be able to see them coming, right? And that's not the case. We wish that the dangerous and destructive people of the world that they all looked like Charles Manson. That would make things significantly easier, but they rarely do. They rarely do. So I was in a class this weekend, and hold on a second. I was in a class this weekend and kind of got in a squabble, I guess you'd say, with the instructor, because we were talking about psychopaths, and he was, or antisocial personality disorder, and he was saying, oh, well, they're very irritable, they're very hostile, they're very aggressive, you'll see these people coming. And I had said, you know what, that's actually, it was not that I was wanting to, I wasn't trying to argue, I wasn't trying to call him out. It was completely this reactive thing that came out of me. And I said, well, sometimes they're actually charming and you can't see them coming. More often than not, that's the case. And so we went back and forth, and it was the most infuriating thing, because a lot of people think that, and they're incredibly mistaken. I've worked with some textbook, like, psychopathic people and patients, and if you were to go out in the waiting room, you wouldn't have been able to pick out who was who. That's how that goes. So it's not just us that, like, we're struggling with this. It's just good people in general struggle with it. Okay, let's see here. Scrolling up here. Crystal asked the question, does anyone find that finalizing separation agreements and stuff brings crap up all over again? Yes, I think that's very, very common. There was a term, and I wish I could remember which book it was in. It was a brilliant term, and they had this concept of, they called it bookending. And it was basically like, when you know that you're going into a difficult time, you're going into court, you're going into the attorney's office, you're going to have to deal with this difficult person, whatever role they play in your life, to line up support ahead of time and then afterwards. So you're bookending this problematic experience with support on either side. And I just think that is absolutely brilliant. So anticipate that it's going to be uncomfortable, and know that you don't have to do this alone, that if you can kind of gather your horses, circle your wagons, kind of figure out, okay, who is in your corner? Do you have a friend? Do you have a therapist? Do you have a life coach? Do you have a support group? If you have a family member that's sympathetic and that understands, knowing kind of who's in your corner is a really, really important thing for these kinds of times. And I'm a big fan of, in general, of erring on the side of caution. So, like Camilla was saying earlier, hope dies last. And so and that's a kind of across the board. So what tends to happen is people think, oh, I'll be fine. I don't want to bother anybody. It's probably not going to be a big deal. I've been dealing with this for such a long time. I'm just used to it by now. And they don't get support. And they don't want to be a bother. They think it's, not that big of a thing, or what have you. But it's just, then it's really difficult. So it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to let people know, hey, I'm going through this. It's really difficult. Would you be available? Could I call you after I'm done here? Or could you meet for lunch? I'll happily buy your lunch if you'll just listen to me vent. These kinds of things. Okay. Stacy asks, do all narcissists cheat? I have a very uncomfortable feeling that there's a possibility that my covert narcissist may be cheating. Well, I don't think we could say, kind of give a blanket statement about that all narcissists do X, right? Because they're people, they all vary, and there's always that one exception out there that would prove, there's always that one exception. But I think what you can understand is if a person is truly that narcissistic, that their position in the world is such that they are the center of their universe and they are always right and they are always entitled to do whatever they want to do. If you can wrap your head around that, everything else they do makes sense. So they don't care. There's no empathy, there's no remorse, and there's no regard for the rights of other people. It's truly all about them. And that's what can be so maddening, because a normal person, we tend to follow a moral code, right? We get married, we expect we're going to be faithful. You know what I mean? Like, you're accountable for your behavior, and you kind of understand how things are going to go when you take on certain things. And to be around somebody that seems to be on the same page, that will, they will marry you, they'll take vows, they'll do all these things, but yet then they have no problem lying, cheating, stealing, doing all of that. It can be very confusing. So do they all cheat? Probably not. Do they all have that blinding degree of entitlement and that jaw-dropping level of, indifference to the cruelty of their behavior? Yes, that's pretty much across the board. Because a person would have to, because they experience cognitive dissonance too. So that's how they're resolving it. So if a person's viewpoint is, I'm at the center of the world, I'm always right, I should always get my way, like that's their understanding. Any incoming information that does not meet that criteria, they start rewriting it. So this is where you get into crazy town, because if they cheat on you, they'll deny it, or they'll blame you, or they'll blame the other person. They won't be sincerely accountable for it. With anything, they physically abuse you. Again, they'll deny it. They'll blame it. They'll say they'll minimize it. It was no big deal. Then you somehow deserved it, or that you're making a big deal out of nothing, or they'll show that how you're not perfect either. It's this complete inability to be accountable for their behavior. So again, once you see that's their place in the world, then nothing, I mean, the stuff that they do might still kind of catch you off guard, but you can see, yeah, this is where this is coming from. Agatha says, why do people still think that they can manage the abuse? Well, I think that's a big question. I think there's a lot of different factors going on. If a person, for any of us, the more invested we are in the outcome of a situation, whether it's emotionally, physically, financially, the harder it is for us to leave. And so when a person's in a relationship, especially if they're married, they have kids, they have a house, they're all kinds of intertwined, it's very difficult for them to want to leave. And so because leaving is such an uncomfortable thought, then if they're not comfortable with leaving, then they're going to have to get comfortable with staying. That's the only way they're going to be able to resolve that cognitive dissonance. And then you've got the added manipulation, the incoming manipulation from the abuser. So we're already experiencing our own cognitive dissonance of, I don't want to be in an abusive relationship, but I also don't want to leave my relationship. Well, if we're going to stay and we're not going to leave, then we've got to somehow either buy into all of their lies and the blame and the denial and all of that, Or we're going to pretend that it's not, we're going to start lying to ourselves. It's not that bad. It's been worse. I've experienced worse. I'm not perfect either. All of this stuff, and all of that contributes over time, and not even a lot of time, to this erosion of a person's reality and erosion to their identity and self-esteem and all of that. And this is it's mind control. A lot of this is exactly how people get caught up with murderous dictators, with cults, with all kinds. It's because it's the same people steering the ship. It's these really pathological personalities, and they all operate the exact same way. So because they have the exact same mindset. But yeah, that's kind of the short answer. I mean, there's other factors, right? Like, it's difficult to leave. Fear is a big reason people tend to stay. They're afraid of, if I leave, they're going to hurt me. They're afraid of, if I leave, I'm not going to have any money. If they're there's so many other factors that come into play as to why people try to manage an unmanageable situation. And again, a lot of people who aren't in it, it's easy to kind of Monday morning quarterback somebody else's life, right? And to be like, well, that would never happen to me. I would have done that totally different. And they would be wrong, because this kind of stuff, it happens so slowly and subtly, and it's such a slow erosion that most people, I've never met anybody that really knew what was going on, because they'd leave. They don't know what's going on. And so next thing you know, they kind of, things have to get really bad in order for them to realize, I can't stay here any longer. And then they leave. But then at that point, I mean, it's just, there's so many factors, and it's easy for other people to judge. It's, which, that adds to shame and embarrassment and all these other factors, but it's difficult when you're in it, and it's difficult to get out of it. Sherry says, what if your kids are teenagers? How do you handle explaining what's going on? Or do you? It's so confusing. This is a tricky one, because there's a term out there called parental alienation syndrome. And it's where one parent is poisoning the children against the other one. So they're saying, oh, they're painting this picture of the other parent as a bad person. They're manipulative. They did this, that, and the other, and it's harming the relationship between the children and that parent. It's very difficult when your ex is, has all kinds of problematic behavior, especially if their behavior is impacting the children. So it can be a real fine line to walk. I'm a big fan of sticking to the behavior for sure. So not using the label narcissist, sociopath, even if they've been diagnosed with it. So just talking about the behavior and validating them. So let's say if your ex had promised that they were going to see them this weekend and then they don't, or there's this pattern of like being continually let down, or whatever, being yelled at, being put down, being insulted, being embarrassed, all of these kinds of things. So if your child is coming to you and of course you're wanting to say this in like age appropriate language, just validating them. Wow. Okay. It sounds like, it sounds like you're really hurt and you're frustrated and you're angry, and you know what? I don't blame you. You have every right to be. I think anybody in your situation would feel the exact same way. And I'm really sorry that your mother, father, whoever it is, did that. It's not right and it's not fair. And just validate them with that. And then as they get older, in time, they're going to start seeing this is an ongoing pattern, that mom or dad continually does this. And so then you can start kind of talking to them in terms of, if you're seeing this pattern as well, anticipating that this is going to continue, and kind of saying, well, like doing as much damage control, I guess, is that you can do up front. Because here's the thing too. So if you are trying to anticipate things and you were to say, well, you know what, your father hasn't come through the last 5 times. There's a very solid chance he's not going to come through again. I just don't want you to have your feelings hurt, because hope dies last. And because this person is their parent, they're going to become very defensive. And then that trying to spare their feelings and help them can really backfire, because especially if your ex then does follow through this time, then your child is going to be like, well, see, mom or dad really does care. You're just jealous, or you're just mad. And then they're going to start taking it out on you because you're the safe parent. You're the one that they know that they can get mad at because you're still going to be there, versus your ex, who that relationship runs really hot and cold. And so they don't dare to confront them or to have honest communication, because they're terrified that they're actually going to leave. And they probably are right. They probably will. So I would just stick with just validating them if there is that pattern. So let's say, for example, you have younger children, okay? And your ex sees them every Wednesday night, and the deal is they're supposed to have dinner and do homework when they're out together. And then your child's supposed to come back and these things have been done. And consistently, these things have not been done. At some point, we have to realize, and hopefully earlier than later, we only have control over our behavior. So understanding this is just what your ex does, then setting your child up to win and setting yourself up to maintain peace in your life. Being like, well, you know what, honey, let's go ahead and just knock out this homework. And you might even want to phrase it, let's just go ahead and knock out this homework. We'll have some snacks. And then that way you and mom or dad can go out and do whatever it is that you guys want to do. And that way, maybe you're not feeding them dinner, but you're giving them a granola bar, something to just tide them over. Do you see what I'm saying? And then that way you're not shocked. You're not up until midnight helping them with homework when your ex drops them off. And then they can't get up the next morning. And then there's yelling and tears and you know what I mean? All of that. So anticipating as much as you can ahead of time, trying to validate them. Excuse me. Excuse me. Yeah. So that's what I have to say about that. Let's I love that. Spiritual goddess of enlightenment says, I started therapy today and my therapist is very compassionate and a good listener. She told me I don't need anyone to validate me because I know what I saw and what I've been through, and she won't do it for me. I love that. I love that so very much. This is something that can be very challenging for a person who's fresh out of an abusive relationship because they don't trust their judgment. It's being in a relationship like this. It's like having somebody take a magnet to your internal compass and you're just all over the place. And one of the biggest parts in healing is learning to exactly that, learning to self-validate and to turn inward and to ask yourself, like, to get the clarity that you need from inside. So that's a big shift in thinking and understanding that oftentimes takes people quite a while to get to that point. So that can be really helpful because here's where a lot of people get tangled up, myself included, is they'll start saying like, well, I don't know. Well, Dana, is this a red flag? And well, what do you think about this? And I don't know. And am I missing something? I mean, do you think this person could be a narcissist, or do you think this person is manipulative and this, that, and the other? And the problem, and I get it because I've been there. The problem with this is when we're asking other people for validation, other people don't have the full context. And even if they did have the full context, there's no guarantee that they're not going to be full of well-intended bad advice. And because at the end of the day, we are the ones that have to live with the consequences of our decisions, not anybody else. It's really important that we're able to be like, you know what? Yes, this is a problem for me, or this is what I want to do, regardless of whether anybody else, you could have a whole room full of people that disagree with you. And sometimes on major decisions in life, you might have that. And we've got to be able to just stand tall in our truth and be like, well, this is what I feel that I need to do. So again, that kind of goes back to that whole your North Star being your safety and your sanity, and knowing how it feels when something feels like a problem. So that, and again, that can take a little while when a person's fresh out, but a problem feels problematic. You feel confused, you feel irritated, you feel angry, you feel frustrated, and all of these feelings of discomfort grow over time as long as that problem is still there. You know when something brings peace in your life because you feel peaceful. You feel safe, secure, kind of cool, calm, nonplussed. You feel fine. Angie and I were talking about this, I guess, what was it yesterday? Gosh, man, what in a total time loop here. Yesterday on the live stream, we were talking about, I just lost my train of thought. Oh, shoot. What was I going to say? What were we just talking about? Validation. Oh, shoot. I do not remember. Agatha, do you remember what I was going to say? She says, validation. You're talking about validation. Oh, I'm so sorry. It's gone. If it comes back, that's going to bug me. What were Angie and I talking about that I thought was worth sharing? I'm sorry. If I think of it, I will mention. Man, yesterday was a really, really long day. I had this class that goes from 6 to 10 at night, and it's normally an hour drive either way on that. And it was such awful weather last night. It took me about 2.5 hours to get home. And I should have just gotten a hotel. I've never, actually maybe one other time, it was one of the most awful drives I've ever had. It was literally just blinding snow. You could not see. There were times where you could not even see 6 inches in front of your face. It was just absolutely scary, awful. So I've been kind of dragging all day. I've been in a funk all day because I got home so late and didn't get a lot of sleep. Let's see here. Mela asks, what movies would you recommend that have narcissistic characters? Okay, so let's talk because again, these labels can really derail people, and then people want to debate this, and it gets people all tangled up and off track. So let's just talk about behaviors. So really problematic behaviors like lying, manipulating, pathological inability to be accountable for their behavior, these kinds of things. Well, I think you could look at the R. Kelly documentary. I think you could look at the Fire documentary, Fire Festival documentary. You could look at Silence of the Lambs. You could look at, there's the Ted Bundy special that's on Netflix. I believe it's Netflix right now. There's another great documentary called Tickle. That's really wild. I mean, talk about just crazy. Bill Cosby that kind of behavior. What's his name? Chris Watts. There's some channels on YouTube. There's some channels on YouTube that are like true crime channels. And again, it's so wild. I mean, I am continually surprised that I'm surprised by anything. I'm up to my eyeballs in this stuff day in and day out, and have been on YouTube and all this stuff for probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 years now. And then before, when I was a psychiatric nurse and working with all that, I mean, it's been 10 plus years and I'm still caught off guard. And I have this huge support group where people are sharing with 54,000 people in it that share stories. You know, there's like 100 different posts in there a day. So I think that just speaks to normal, decent people. When you think that evil has a bottom, that surely this is the worst of the worst. Oh, that's absolutely horrific that a person could do this. And then you hear another story and your jaw just drops and you're like, oh my God, I would have never thought that another human being would have done that. And it just keeps coming. So I think it's a true crime. I think it's called true crime. And again, I would not recommend if you're feeling hypervigilant or any of this stuff, because that's really dark. But there's some darkly fascinating stories on there about, those are mainly all murders. The degree of narcissism of most of these people, of most of the killers, is just jaw-dropping. The level of entitlement, the arrogance that they thought that they would get away with something like this. There you can see a lot of these kinds of behaviors taken to an extreme. Let's see here. Yeah, Camilla says, I guess I want to see a run-of-the-mill narcissist in a movie so I can spot them. Movies are different than reading for me processing. Mommy Dearest is a good one. That's an old one. That was probably the movie that brought maternal narcissism to light. Really disturbing movie. Can anybody else recommend? I'm trying to think. I'd like to find some movies that show a wide range, that show like men, women, gay, straight, black, white, you know, the spectrum, because I think it really truly does help for people to see as close to their own situation, like reflected back at them, as possible. The documentary Tickle is kind of, I would say that the guy is gay and frustrated and in denial. That drives a lot of his behavior, would be my guess. There's Mommy Dearest is maternal. There's Fire Festival, which is just kind of more run-of-the-mill sociopathic behavior, but it's still good to see the behind the scenes of it. R. Kelly, same kind of thing, just, you know, outrageous narcissism on his end. I think it's important too, as you're watching these movies, especially the documentaries, to just be aware that they look like other people. And unless you're on the receiving end of their behavior, they act like other people. That I would love to have this gal on the show. She's the daughter of the BTK killer. And she recently came out with a book. And she was saying she has PTSD from, the realization that her father was a serial killer. And she was saying that they had no idea that parents were married. He was a good father, that they had a great relationship, and was absolutely stunned when the FBI, because the FBI called everybody in his inner circle like that day in order to be like, okay, we're going to get him now. And then you guys need to get safe all at once, kind of a thing. So they're normal looking people, normal acting people. If you're coming across somebody that is like Charles Manson, that just looks like trouble, then for sure, like if their behavior is really outrageous and really problematic, then that person is a slam dunk. You need to get out of there. Because if they can't even pull it together in public and they're that problematic, then they're lacking. I mean, that's just, problem city. That they're lacking that self-awareness. They're lacking that ability to kind of control their impulses. They're lacking the ability to control their aggressive behavior, this kind of stuff. But again, people like that are few and far between. Okay, let's see. That's a great question. Agatha says, any movies about real truth, about the true real love? Huh. The only movie that comes to mind about that I think paints a very realistic picture of love is the movie It's a Wonderful Life. Because here's this guy, George Bailey, who wanted to have this other life. He wanted to travel the world and do all these things. And his real life situation didn't allow for that. And he ended up staying in this small town, but he ended up marrying this woman that he loved. And they had, I think, 3 or 4 children. And he was kind of just going through life, but then some stuff happened and he became really suicidal. And then at the end of it, when he realizes everything he has, to me, that was just a very accurate portrayal of, it's not always about off the chart sex or this amazing connection or any of this. It's about this deep appreciation for this other person and really truly seeing like that life is not perfect and that there's so many things that can go on. And sometimes, I think it was John Lennon, said life happens when we're making other plans. Like sometimes we just don't end up where we think we're going to, but there can be so much that's still good about that if we've got the good people in our lives, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I'd be curious, does anybody else have any ideas for movies that really show like a healthier understanding of like love and appreciation and not this, whirlwind craziness? Maybe you could say When Harry Met Sally. I think you could make a case for that. I think that movie is darling. Yeah, I'd be curious. Anybody else? I'm so sorry, Angel. She says, Dana, I'm floored at how narcissists have no compassion. My first narcissist dropped me off at the ER when I was losing my baby. I was induced and he just dropped me off and went to work. I lost the baby. Oh, my goodness, that's just heartbreaking. Yeah, their level of indifference, cold, cruel indifference it just is so hard. It's just so difficult to understand. Like how can that be? Like where, because, I think how most of us understand human being, like that's empathy is such a big characteristic of a human. And to not have that is just absolutely, it's like dealing with an alien species because, especially when they can present so normal when they want to, it's just very bizarre how their behavior works. Let's see. Agatha, I missed part of the conversation here, but she had said about feelings, I am very much happy most of the time, which I can attest to. and in touch with my feelings. When I am sad, I am sad. When I'm angry, I am angry. When I'm happy, I am happy. And I am at peace with me. I really like that. And I wanted, let me, you bring up some good points. I wanted to clarify that really having an authentic life is about being as honest as possible with yourself and with, in appropriate ways, with other people. And a big part of that is so weird, man. Like we're all kind of indoctrinated into the world, into this culture, whatever culture you might be in, to not show certain emotions. And it's so wild how we can get so used to not feeling certain ways that we just suppress all of that. And then but it comes out in other ways, right? It comes out, we start drinking, we start using drugs, we start eating, we start developing eating disorders. So we stop eating, or now we develop this strained relationship with food or money or sex or any number of things in order to try to cope. There was a saying a while back about, and it didn't make sense to me for like the longest time, but it is so spot on, that if you are struggling with depression or anxiety, first make sure that you don't have a narcissist in your life. And you know what that means is, if you've got this crazy maker in your life, you're going to start, that stuff's going to come out in other ways. You're either going to start feeling depressed chronically because you can't figure out what's wrong, what you're doing wrong. Why can't you turn things around? Why can't you get through to them? They're treating you terribly. Or you're going to start having anxiety because you can't ever do anything right. You can't seem to please them. You can't ever seem to get through to them. So those are the two emotions that tend to surface when a person's in an abusive relationship of any kind. So getting a big part of healing is to really just get back in tune with our feelings. And the Pete Walker book that we read last book club, he had talked about this, that men, it's more socially acceptable for men to be in tune with their anger. The downside of that is that it's socially unacceptable for them to be in tune with their sadness. It's a whole men don't cry, kind of man up attitude. Women tend to be the opposite. Sadness is more appropriate. Women can cry. Women, no big deal to call your friends and, talk about things or what have you. So sadness is appropriate, but then anger is not. And of course, these are all human emotions, and it's important that we're in touch with all of them, because man, things get really out of whack because our emotions help us to navigate our environment. So if we're not aware, and these unpleasant emotions are some of the earliest indicators we have if that something is off, that a boundary has been violated, that we're unhappy, that something needs to change. So if we're suppressing sadness or anger, we're missing. It's like having a car that doesn't have a steering wheel, or that doesn't have it's a pretty major thing to not have, or it doesn't have a brake pedal. You're only going to get so far in a vehicle like that. You got to have all of the parts and pieces. So there's some exercises. I think it was in that Pete Walker book, correct me if I'm wrong, where he had a bunch of these exercises about getting in touch with your different emotions and truly experiencing them, that are really, it's worth going through, like examining how can you tell? How do you express anger? How does it feel internally? How do you express anger externally? Do you eat? Do you yell? Do you go to kickboxing classes? How do you express that anger? Same thing with sadness. How does it feel inside of you when you're sad? And how do you express that sadness? How does it feel inside of you when you're happy? And how do you express that? So, and one of the ways that might help to look at this is you could pretend to be a scientist. So completely neutral, third party, non-judgmental person. Pretend that that, or maybe not that you're a scientist, but that there's a scientist observing you. And what would they say about how you're behaving and how that you express anger or sadness or any of the different behaviors that you have? Like, what do you think they would say? And it's again, not a judgmental way at all. It's just an observational way. That can be very telling. It can also be interesting to kind of go around your environment and do the same thing. Like, look at your environment through a neutral set of eyes of how would a scientist look? What would they say if they were to walk into this room, or if they were to look in my closet or my refrigerator? Like, what kind of conclusions would they come to? It can help to kind of deepen your own level of self-awareness, because again, it's difficult for us to see these things about ourselves because we're so close to it, right? Because we're inside of ourselves. Okay, let me scroll down here. One of the things that we're going to talk about tomorrow, by book club tomorrow, 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're discussing the book, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. One of the takeaways that pertains to this conversation now, which is why I'm bringing it up, is he talks about trauma. And when a person goes into crisis, that your brain basically goes offline. And what can be so helpful with that is just understanding this. So if we kind of go into that fight or flight mode, we're not there. The rational part of ourself is not there. And so when you're examining your own behavior, having some compassion for, well, I think there are a lot of things we can get there. Having some compassion for yourself when you do act in a way that's not you, because that's what's going on. Your amygdala, the lower parts of your brain are taking over, that the logic and critical thinking part of your brain is not there. It's also helpful to understand that when you're with other people, especially abusers, who, when they go into that fight or flight mode, they're not there. Reasoning with them is only going to further upset them because they're not operating from that part of their brain. It's a deeper part of their brain. So understanding with like your anger, understanding these different emotions that you have, it can really help to prepare yourself as much as possible, because just knowing that you're going to get knocked offline. Most people get knocked offline when they get angry because you go into fight mode. So it can really help. So here's an example. And I hadn't thought about this until fairly recently. So when I was in nursing school, we had to take advanced life support you have pediatrics and then you have adults. And it's very different life support than like regular CPR. And in that kind of a life support, where you're on like a crash cart team, everybody has a role. You have a person that is on the bagging of the oxygen. You have a person who is on chest compressions. You have a person who's drawing up medications and delivering them. You have a person who's recording everything that's going on. So this team, everybody has their designated role, and it runs ideally smoothly. And then there's this whole, we call it closed loop communication. So if somebody's calling out, okay, I need this medication, we need this much, okay, give it now. And then that person gives it now. And then the recorder writes it down. And the reason everything is this systematic and laid out, so when they would say, okay, I need this kind of medication, I need it drawn up, I need it given now, then the person would repeat back to them, okay, you need this kind of medication, you need this much of it, I'm giving it now. So they know that you heard them and that it's been given. What's interesting about that is that behavior, it becomes so ingrained when a person's on like that crash team that they're not having to really think, because it becomes this is your role. Like you just go into that default mode of this is my role. This is what I do. It's the same thing with firefighters or EMS or anybody that's dealing with crisis. It's so rehearsed that it works because you're not having to think. And there are these different fail safes in place for like that, the crash team of repeating things back, that closed loop communication, having one role, having somebody record it so everybody can see what happened, when, and where people are in the process. The point of this is when we're examining our own behavior and we're trying to come up with how can we function when our brain is offline, it's doing things like this. So chunking it down to like the most basic task. Like what is the one thing that needs to get done? What is the one thing that you need to take control over? Making it easy on yourself. Realizing it can help to be accountable to another person. This is what I'm going to do. And then they can ask you again, is this what you did today? To keep you on track. Writing it down. You can do journaling, these kinds of things. And because we can get so hard on ourselves when we're in crisis to be like, what was I thinking? I can't believe I did that. You know, what was wrong with me? And I need to just pull it together. And I need to, you know, we can just be so terrible to ourselves. And so this book, The Body Keeps the Score, I think really does a great job at explaining the brain changes that happen under trauma and then in a wide variety of different ways. So join us tomorrow. Okay. Yes, that's a great point. And Agatha says, you can train yourself to have a run response instead of freeze. Yes. So if you know like that there's certain situations that cause you to freeze, we all have them. It's identifying, okay, what are yours? So if you know that you're going to see, you know, your narcissistic mother or your narcissistic ex or whoever it is, to kind of come up with what are some of the common ways that they've gone about pushing your buttons in the past, because odds are that's how they're going to continue pushing them in the future. So this way you're not completely knocked off guard by this. And so even if you could help, you can come up with these responses ahead of time. If you find that you're still, and practice them. Practice if your mother gets on you about, I don't know, whatever it is. She doesn't like the way you dress. She doesn't like your different choices in life, that you're coming up with some sort of response to kind of just end that. If you're still not able to think clearly, then being like, okay, knowing that your default is going to be just to go to the bathroom, just to get up and go to the bathroom. If you're at work and you have a boss who's awful and you need to gather yourself, just get up and go to the bathroom. So just breaking that pattern to get yourself to a place where you can calm down and you can breathe and your brain can come back online. So you can actually start thinking clearly, because if you're offline, then who knows, like we can either stay in freeze mode or we can become very reactive. And then, you know, that can be problematic. Crystal Jean says, I need to read a book club book for once. Yes, they're fantastic. They're very good books. The cool thing is most of these books are on audiobook now, so you can just listen to them while you're driving. And just FYI, most libraries these days have their own app, and you can get audiobooks through them for free. So you might want to contact your local library and see. It's free to get the app. It's free to borrow them. It's a great way to go about, getting these books. I would also encourage you, if we are reading book club books that you find helpful, to also contact your local library and ask them if they can order it and put it in stock. Because, people are out there and they don't even know where to begin to look for this kind of stuff. Sam says, how can I learn to say no to my bully, narcissist, borderline brother? Well, Sam, I would encourage you to kind of think about the different ways that he goes about pushing your boundaries and bullying you. And I guess the other question is, are you both adults, and are you out of the house? Because that's going to make things a lot easier. If that is the case, then like we were talking about earlier, knowing what you have control over and knowing what you don't have control over. So you have control over your actions. You don't have control over his. So anticipating this. So let's say, for example, he does things, he tends to throw a fit during or bully you during Thanksgiving or Christmas, these kinds of things. Instead of having people over to your house for Thanksgiving or Christmas, because then you can't escape because you're waiting for them to leave, either meeting everybody at a restaurant, meeting everybody at somebody else's house, you're putting yourself in a position where then you can leave. This applies to any situation. So if he wants to, see you or spend time, you're making sure that you can leave when you're ready to leave, that you're not driving over there together, that you're not dependent on him for anything really. And then practicing different ways that you can say no. So let's say if he's asking you for money and he never repays you, saying something like, well, you know what? I have a new rule in my life. I just don't loan money to anybody. I'm sorry, but it's just, it causes hard feelings, and, that just doesn't work for me. If he, needs a place to crash and he's coming over to your house, these kinds of things, then just saying, you know what? It's just not working for me. I really hope that you can find a place, but it's just interfering with my work. I really wish I could help you out, but I can't. So good luck. I, hope you can find what you need. So there's ways to say no that kind of soften the blow, which tends, depending on the kind of manipulator that you're working with, some of them just need a flat out no, but sometimes a flat out no can really throw fuel on the fire. So sometimes just kind of approaching it in like a softer, gentler way can help. You know your situation the best, so you'll have to be the judge of that. Okay, let's see here. Okay, let's see. Mora asks, Dana, are you really able to gain self-awareness after abuse? Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's I think people struggle gaining it really any other way. Because again, we all think that we have solid boundaries, standards, and deal breakers, and we don't realize how unself-aware we really are until we get tangled up with a person like this. Like there's so much that we can look at within ourselves when problematic people fly under our radar and come into our life. So yeah, and here's the thing with self-awareness. It's not necessarily about even gaining it. It's about stripping away all of the garbage that's been piled on top of it. Like you have it. Your inner self, your authentic self already has all of the answers that you need. The challenge is just unburying it. And that can take some doing, because this stuff, society, religion, culture, expectations, parental expectations, all of these rubble is put on people from birth. And, it takes time to unbury. Yes, I love that, Gigi. She says, yes, a reaffirmation of self is what I have called it. I love that. Yes, absolutely. Okay, let's see. Yes, Gigi's talking about post-traumatic growth after abuse. Yes, it's post-traumatic growth. For those of you that have not heard the term, it's growth that happens after trauma. And it's the most powerful growth out there. It truly, truly is. For all the reasons that we've been talking about. Your life's blown apart. You start consciously putting the pieces together because you have that very unique experience of having your life blown apart. Most people don't have that. Or I should say, most people that don't go through something like this don't have that. And so then what happens? Well, they kind of can, because there's not that pain, there's not that motivation to do all of this insightful work and to examine all this stuff. They just kind of go chugging along through life. But for those of us that have been completely blown apart, we're consciously choosing. That's the thing. Like when you get to the kind of I don't know if there's really like an end to it, but when you get far enough down the track on this and you've put enough of these pieces in place, you realize I really have built something very valuable here. Like this is living my life on purpose. And you really guard that. And then you're very particular about who you have in your inner circle, and you value your inner circle, you value your energy, you value your time, you value your emotions, you value everything because you worked really hard to put the pieces together in a certain way. And you're not going to just let anybody in to potentially mess that up. Like you just go slower when you're having new people come into your life, and you go about trusting people. You're slower to trust, which is appropriate because you don't know them. You just slow things down and really make sure that that what you think is nourishing for you is actually nourishing. Rachel says, I have realized that not only was my ex an evil narcissist, but I lost 2 close friends over 20 years. I feel very lonely. And yes, my life was blown apart. I don't know if you've heard me talk about it. I'm a big fan of the website meetup.com. There are people in all walks of life, of all ages, of all interests on there. And it can be a really fantastic way to go about meeting some new people that are more in alignment with who you are today. And that can really be a great way to start building up that social circle again, cultivating new hobbies, getting back out there. Yeah, CFIN says, I see so much more of even my friends' thought processes now, let alone my own. Yes, and that's powerful too. So when you're getting to that place where you're able to self-validate and you're becoming more comfortable for what is for you and what isn't for you, and kind of a better understanding of kind of what's functional and what's dysfunctional, you start seeing a lot of this stuff much more clearly in other people. And you're like, ooh, yikes, like that's some really terrible advice. Like you see it. I will say also with that kind of stuff, you're also seeing problematic behavior through the lens of like abuse. So like when things can be taken to an extreme, because most people, I shouldn't say most people, I think most people have experienced this. They just haven't ever been to like this severe of a degree that, or that they just haven't sought out these kind of resources. But people that haven't been through significant trauma, the well-intended bad advice tends to keep circulating because there's these kind of, I don't know, like they're not couching it within the context of like a healthy understanding. Boundary standards, deal breakers. They're not putting their safety and sanity. They're not making their safety and sanity a priority in a nutshell. because everything else really revolves around that. If your safety and sanity is on the back burner, that's dysfunctional. I think that's the most condensed way that I can describe dysfunctional behavior. So, because it's not going to work for you. There's a time and place for us to put the wants and needs of other people ahead of our own, but it can't be permanently that way, because then you're sinking yourself to save somebody else, and then you sink. Wonder Woman says, I just wish my kids were not blown apart. Now they will replay this in their relationships. Well, not necessarily. So all of this stuff can really open up some really great conversations about all of this, about letting your kids know, what, the world is going to tell you all kinds of things about the kind of person that you should be. And the world is going to have expectations for you. And the biggest gift that you can give yourself is to question everything, even things that I'm telling you as your parent, or question everything across the board and find out what really resonates with you and what doesn't, and really get grounded in that, because it's very easy to get pulled off center and having these discussions. So really, I mean, if you're having these kinds of discussions, because most people don't have these kind of self-awareness discussions at home, it can really set them up to go down a very different path, because they're so much more aware of this stuff. Let's see. Okay, I'm scrolling up. Let's see here. Chrissy asks, is borderline similar to narcissism? I heard so this class that I was taking over the weekend and again, let me just say too, this class that I was taking, where the instructor and I had this kind of were butting heads about antisocial personality disorder. He is one of my very favorite instructors. So let me just say that, because I just don't want people to have a bad impression of him. He's a wonderful, wonderful instructor. We just really did not see eye to eye on that. But anyways, he had described borderline personality disorder, and I think the best way I've ever heard it described. And he said it's the border between neurosis and psychosis. And yes, so a person's really kind of going between those two. There's a lot of overlap, because again, this is behavior. So if you're thinking about it in terms of, well, let me back up. So like this kind of relationship busting behavior that tends to occur within kind of these cluster B personality disorders. So you have histrionic, borderline, narcissist, antisocial. It's how a lot of these different personality disorders present themselves. It's erratic, dramatic, and emotional. And that kind of covers a lot of ground. And again, everybody's different. So some people, manipulation can be their big thing, lack of empathy, lack of remorse. People with borderline personality disorder, they have guilt, they have empathy, whereas antisocial and narcissists do not. There's a lot of similarities between borderline and histrionic, or I should say there can be. There's a lot of similarities between narcissist and antisocial. All antisocials are narcissists at the core. So yeah, there's a lot of overlap. This is why I think it's important to see problematic behavior for what it is. I know the labels, the diagnoses and stuff, that can be really interesting, but I really feel that for the most part, there's a lot of issues that I kind of have with this. It can really get people tangled up in trying to understand, is this person a narcissist? Like, do they have a narcissistic personality disorder, or are they just a really, selfish, ridiculous person that lacks empathy and remorse? Like, well, either way you dice it, it's a problem. And if they're not motivated to change it, well, then there's your answer. So I think just kind of know that, like, it helps to look at behavior and look at where are they in terms of understanding if they need to change. The other part of that is with different diagnoses and labels and such is there's so much. There's a lot of survivors of abuse who get diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. There's a lot of overlap between borderline and PTSD. So, impulsivity, pattern of unstable relationships, poor self-image, a lot of these things, walking the line between neurosis and psychosis, that's also tends to happen with PTSD. And so my concern with this is if a person, let's just say, even if they have borderline personality disorder, if they're hearing about these kinds of things and they're like, oh my goodness, that's me. They were right. I was the problem. And then that can push a person to suicide, really. So I just, and I know, you know what I'm saying? Like, this is just my general kind of philosophy on these different types of labels and why there's many reasons as to why I'm hesitant to use them. Another reason is because it can come across as pathologizing a person. So if you're talking to a judge or a therapist and you're saying, yes, my ex is a complete psychopath or a borderline or what have you, when we're using different like mental health diagnoses to describe somebody, even though we're in our mind, we're like, no, like legit, they are a psychopath. To other people, they can see that as, well, now you're pathologizing them. Like, you're basically weaponizing these diagnoses and you're using it as a way to hurt. Does that make sense? Instead of, it's just a weird place that we're at, kind of understanding these things. So it can often backfire. So if you're going to a judge or an attorney or a therapist and you're trying to kind of get them caught up to speed with what you dealt with, and you're saying, yes, my ex was a complete sociopath, they might look at it, it might have the exact opposite effect that you're hoping for. So instead of helping to clarify what you went through, they might be thinking, that we're not describing this accurately. So it really helps everybody involved if you're just talking directly about behavior. Because here's the other thing about this too, is if you tell anybody, me, a therapist, a judge, an attorney, whoever, yes, my ex is a narcissist or my ex is a sociopath, that covers a lot of ground. And so one person can say, yes, my ex is a borderline. And there's so much room for confusion because we're not talking about behavior. So you could say, oh yes, my ex is a borderline. There's so much. Like, to you might be like, oh yeah, they're erratic, dramatic, emotional. They're highly manipulative. They threaten suicide all the time. They're this, that, and the other. Whereas another person might have a very different understanding of borderline personality disorder. And so then now there's this confusion over, like, well, what are we talking about? Same thing with narcissists. Most people think, oh, well, they're just really grandiose. They're kind of like, King Louis the 14th, right? They just the big hat and they've got the fur coat and they're just, grandiose over the top. But that's not what most people mean. And so this is why it's important to talk about behavior. And then the other part of that too is these different diagnoses, they're meant to describe behavior anyhow, right? But because it's easier for like diagnostic purposes, you have a label like narcissistic personality disorder. That kind of comes under fire because it's an issue really with like the English language, because you have, okay, this person has narcissistic personality disorder. We then call them a narcissist. It's their behavior. It's not who they are. So it's more kind of, I think I was gonna say it's more PC, but it's really even just more accurate to describe like they're a human being at the core, right? But this is their behavior. But it's a lot to just be like, oh, well, there's the person with narcissistic personality disorder, or this person with narcissistic traits. Like that's a mouthful. And so we tend to condense it. But by doing that, then people can lose their humanity. Because then we're saying, oh, well, you're this thing. And it's like, well, no, this person's not schizophrenic. They're not a borderline. They're not whatever. They're a human being that has schizophrenia. They're a human being that has XYZ personality disorder. You know, they're a human being. They're not a bulimic. They're not an anorexic. Like they're a person that has anorexia or a person that has bulimia. Do you see what I'm saying? So there's a lot of different kind of challenges with the terminology. TJ says, what about dark triads and any possible help known? I was told no, and my ex didn't want help. So then no. Dark triad especially, you would be wise to distance yourself completely. Dark triad, for those who are interested, you have a really dangerous combination of three things. You have the basically psychopathy. So you have the abnormal brain changes that go along with psychopathy. You have the personality disordered traits of narcissism. And then you have Machiavellianism, which is the learned behavior traits of manipulation. So it's like a triple whammy. You've got a person that has brain abnormalities and deeply rooted personality issues and learned behavior traits that they can easily flip on and flip off. Yeah, no, I'm a big fan, in a nutshell, is find a person who's not a project. It's only if you're with a person who's a project, especially that, it's only going to annoy them and it's going to frustrate you. And they can potentially, and you can lose your life. Because if George Simon, I think, really summed this difference up well. And I think this should be a bigger thing that's looked at in the DSM and in the mental health community as a whole. He really divides behavior up into two categories of kind of, there's, outside of healthy and normal, there's problematic behavior, and then there's problematic behavior that goes to a totally different level, which is character disturbance. If a person is character disturbed, they lack empathy, they lack remorse, they have no moral compass, they feel entitled, they feel justified, they're sadistic, these kinds of things, that's character disturbed. And I know that that's not politically correct and that there's going to be pushback on that. But I think it's very valid to look at that, because not everybody, even though we're all human beings at the core, we're not all wired the same way. And if a person's got behavior that falls into that character disturbance, you would be wise to distance yourself from them. They're not changing. They have no desire to change. They don't experience guilt. They don't experience shame. They don't experience introspection. They don't experience pain from their actions. They don't care, because it's all about them all of the time. And they feel entitled and justified to get their way. And if you get hurt in the process, well, then you probably deserved it, right? That's the thinking. They don't like, they don't care. They don't care about their mother. They don't care about their spouse. They don't care about their children. They don't care. There is nothing there. So we were talking about earlier with the toolkit of our understanding of the world and ourselves and other people in it and how we interact with them is completely out the window and useless when we're dealing with somebody that has that character disturbance. They cannot be reasoned with. They cannot be, you're not dealing with a logic, reasonable, rational human being. They truly, in many ways, are like their own species. They're just completely different. And so trying to get that, and it's heartbreaking, right? When a person is in a relationship with somebody like this, and it can take a person years, if not decades, to fully understand that there is no end, like there's no bottom to there's just no empathy or remorse there. They don't care. And those of us on the receiving end of it are like, how can they treat their children like this? How could they do this? How could they treat an animal like this? How could they treat their own mother like this? How could they do this? It just, man, boy, I've been nothing but nice to this person. How can they then steal my life savings and do all of these terrible things? It's just, it's all again, like all of our understandings about how the world works, that if we are nice to somebody, that they're going to be nice to us back. Treat other people like you'd want to be treated, and they'll kind of do the same, right? That's kind of what we tend to think, that other people are only going to mistreat you if there's some sort of valid reason. I think that's why people tend to stay stuck in this, because they're trying to figure out, well, why would a person just treat me like garbage for no reason? So because they don't understand this, then they're like, well, you know what? I really need to just double down on pleasing them. If I can somehow ingratiate myself enough, if I can somehow do enough in order to someday I'll earn their love. Someday I'll earn their respect. Someday they'll treat me like I'm a human being, and that day never comes. So it's just, or even worse, they get some sort of flash of, or some sort of crumb of that, of their humanity, of appropriate behavior. Maybe after you've left, now they send you this apology. I'm so sorry I couldn't be the person that you needed. It's not your fault, blah, blah. They tell you all these things that you've been waiting for 30 years to hear. And then, but you have to realize there's nothing there. It's manipulation after manipulation after manipulation. There's nothing inside this person. So it's not sincere. And, but those kinds of, when a person experiences that, then there's this feeling of, boy, I should have just hung on for a little while longer. Now they're going to go on and they're going to live happily ever after with somebody else. Somebody else is going to benefit from all of my hard work of trying to get them to grow a moral compass. And now they finally have, and I've left. That's the kind of stuff that drives people to suicide and drinking and all kinds of things. But please understand, if you've experienced a person that has that character disturbance, this stuff's not going to be, really, it's not going to be untangled, period. But it would take a person, if they really truly had a sincere desire to change, it would literally take them decades because they'd have to unlearn all of that problematic behavior. Then they'd have to rebuild all this good behavior. That stuff does not happen overnight. And it's not going to happen for somebody who doesn't experience pain for their behaviors and doesn't have guilt and shame and all that. Okay. Let's see here. Okay. Good. Kim says, yeah, it's so hard to comprehend the truth that your loved one is just character disturbed. Thank you, Dana. I'm finally coming to acceptance with that. Yeah, there's just some behavior out there. Everybody has their own line in the sand for what deal breaker behavior is. I would strongly encourage you to make character disturbance your line in the sand, because these people, they can sometimes do a great job at seeming very sincere and holding it together to where you think that they've changed. And the reality is, what you know is just the tip of the iceberg. And this whole time that you've thought they've changed, they've just gotten better at hiding it. So I think it was Maya Angelou who said, when somebody shows you their true colors, see them. Don't try to repaint them into something else. Yeah. TJ says, yep, being an empath, I doubled down, like you said, and almost died doing it. Yes. And it's just so many levels of tragedy that come from this, because when a person is doubling down during this time, what they're not aware of is how much of themselves that they are willingly eroding. And then that's its own level of a mind scramble after the fact. Because then these relationships, when they fall apart, eventually when they finally fall apart, then that empath, or the person who's been doubling down with people, with trying to please them, with trying to change their own behavior, with putting their wants and needs on the back burner, with kind of stuffing their opinions and their thoughts and any individuality that this abusive person doesn't like. And we're thinking, hey, man, I'm really just doubling down on commitment because, hey, all relationships take work, and, who am I to judge? And hey, nobody's perfect. And so here we are thinking that we're doing the right thing. And especially if you've got a bunch of people around you, which happens more often than not, that's like, yes, you're totally doing the right thing. Good for you. And then on the other side of that, when everything falls apart, there's this realization of, oh my God, I don't even know who I am anymore. Because when we're doing all of that people pleasing, when we're silencing these parts of ourselves, our wants, our needs, our emotions, we're not being assertive, you're silencing yourself. It's like erasing yourself. And then there's that added level of shame and embarrassment and confusion. And people can get stuck in that trap too of, well, I was a willing participant in this. And how did I get here? And how did I become a willing participant? And what's wrong with me? And maybe I must have deserved it because I stayed. And then there's that whole ball of confusion to untangle. And that's just there's so much about manipulation that's so confusing, but it can just really it gets hooks in a person and just drag them off into the bushes, and they don't even realize it until after the fact. So it's just tragic in many ways. Lauren says, does anyone feel bad for hours to the point where they can't do anything? Even trying to shift focus is hard. I had so much to get done tonight and it's almost time for bed. I think that is common. Well, is it the feeling of overwhelm? Is it are you kind of falling into kind of like these little pits of despair, really, where you're thinking about what happened? And I guess either way, something that can help during this time is to set a timer for 10 minutes and then hyper focus on doing one thing. If you're going to, I don't know, make lunches for tomorrow, then you almost kind of play beat the clock. And then you can make it into a game, and it is kind of fun to see how much you can actually do in 10 minutes. But you do that task. And what helps with this is it's a series of small wins. So, and it builds momentum. So, okay, you did that one thing and that you made lunches. Okay, take a breather. Okay, set the timer again for 10 more minutes. Okay, I'm just going to power clean my room. Okay, I'm going to do this again, 10 minutes. Okay, I'm going to go, I don't know, go get some laundry done. Or I'm going to go try to get 2 emails typed and sent. And just building up these small wins. Because when our system is already overwhelmed, and especially if you're dealing with PTSD, then any little thing, it just all starts snowballing and then avalanching. And then it feels completely overwhelming to try to dig out from that. So chunking things down and then doing things in 10-minute increments can help. Another thing that can help is if you are a list maker like I am, when you're writing things down for the day that you need to get done, put next to them, like in parentheses, the time that you expect that to take. Because when we're already in overwhelm, everything feels like it's going to take forever. You don't have the energy for it. You just can't. And if, people start avoiding and it just, then things grow and it becomes even more overwhelming. But if you can also on your to-do list have like 3 things. So only 3. So if you're really feeling overwhelmed or anxious and you find, okay, I'm making these to-do lists that are impossible. Nobody could do these things. It's like 20 things on there in a day. To be like, okay, what are the top 3? And I'm going to pick the top 3. And then in parentheses, I'm going to put how long it's going to take for each one. And that way, when you start feeling overwhelmed, you can chunk it down. Okay, these are the top 3 things that really need to get done today. And this is how long it's going to take. So kind of some of those little tips and tricks can help. Okay, let's see here. Yeah, Tammy says, I get paralyzed from overwhelm. It's like my executive functioning is completely gone. I hear you. It might very well be. I think if we're going into overwhelm, that tends to kind of fall into that freeze or flight mode. And it's that part of the executive functioning part it's not there. It's not the part of your brain that's guiding your behavior. So after we had the house fire, which was in May, so oh my God, it's almost been a year. That's wild to even think about. For quite a while there, and again, it's difficult to see it when you're in it because you're living it in the moment. But there were these moments where I'm like, man, I just am not thinking straight. And I would write things down. I was losing things. I was forgetting where I put things. I was having to be told, I was embarrassed. And I'd have to ask a person, 7 different times for something. And I was just a complete flake. And it was just overwhelm. And, you're just kind of numb and not there. And I think that's pretty universal with any trauma, whatever it is, a car accident, a really significant, scary medical diagnosis, a house fire, an abusive relationship, any of that. Healing Hopeful Survivor asks if I had any flying monkeys after the 2 sociopathic men in my life. And if so, how did you deal with them? I did not with the first one, thank God. The second one ended up, yes, I did. Only one. And it was his wife that I didn't realize he was still married to. So there was that. It's just such a like Lifetime TV movie, ridiculous story. She had left a couple of hateful messages on my voicemail, and I was at such a low place that even her even though she wasn't like actively trying to push me into suicide, I was walking that line. Like I mean, it just was, I was at such a dark, dark place. And I finally mustered up the strength and I called her back. And so then we began talking, but pretty much right. I mean, again, that my situations, I think, is very unique in that I was, you know, very, very far away. I was like 26 hours away from her. And so I didn't have to worry about anybody driving past my house or running into them around town or any of that. And I had made it very clear to her, like, had I known any of this was even going on, I wouldn't have been involved with it. And like, you can have him. Like, I'm not touching this with a 10-foot pole. So it, you know, I don't know. That was its own crazy thing. Cause she had told me that at first that they were happily married and that I had ruined everything and on and on. And then I was so I just was so confused and devastated. And I'm like, how did any of this happen? How did I get here? You know, all this stuff. And then through talking to her, then found out, oh no, this was actually the third time he'd upped and left her for another woman out of the clear blue. And that was when I realized, oh, this is just pathological behavior. And he's just gotten better at, not even really hiding it, but I don't know, lying to her about it, wooing her. I don't know. So it was pretty easy for me to walk away at that point and, you know, not deal with it. I think it can be the upside for sure to moving far away, just not having to deal with any of that stuff. And they're all, you know, we're all older too. So it's the social media component. They're not even on social media, I don't think, or if they are, it's real minimal. It's a non-issue. I think especially for younger people that are on social media and they're more active, and you've got that whole online component of people following you online and harassing you, and then they're creating fake accounts, and then the fake accounts are harassing you, and they're tech savvy enough to know how to have you know, calling you from multiple phone numbers and all of this kind of stuff. It's a whole nother level of you know, of abuse and crazy making. And it's very challenging. And again, kind of going back to making your safety and sanity your North Star. I'm a big fan. I know it's not right. I know it's not fair. I know it's not convenient, but sometimes if you're having your safety and sanity a priority, sometimes, really all of the time, frankly, it helps to just know what you have control over and take action in that direction. So if you can change your email, if you can change your phone number, if you can disconnect your social media accounts and create new ones under a fake name, like use your middle name and then no last name or a totally different last name. These kinds of things where you're not befriending the same people, where you're cutting out anybody that's associated with him. I see this it's got to be self-protective. So if they're on, you know, your ex's side, then they're not on your side. And if people don't understand that what you went through was abuse, then the likelihood of them either intentionally or unintentionally re-victimizing you is really, really high. I would say it's like a for sure thing, because they don't understand it and they're treating it like it's a bad breakup. And why can't you just be more mature and do all this stuff? Like, you don't need that garbage in your life. So I would just fall off the radar as much as you possibly can. Let's see. Oh, Teacher Spring says, yeah, there's a snowstorm and her city has no snowplows. Where do you live? We had a big mess out here. It's snowing like crazy yesterday, and then today is solid ice. It's awful out. Yeah, Wonder Woman says, yeah, I had to get off Facebook because my sanity is my priority. He kept popping up on our former classmates' pages. We graduated in 89. Yeah, it's all of these. And again, sometimes it's just benign, like it just coincidental because there's just some kind of loose connections floating out there. And that stuff can just ruin your day. It can put you in a funk for a week or longer. And you matter. So I don't think the future you is never going to look back at this and think, boy, I really wish I would have, uh, taken my safety and sanity for granted more. Like, the future you is never going to think that. So think about, like, what would future you appreciate? I did not change that kind of stuff with the two different men that I was involved with. And I really wish that I had. For me, it was just more of a totally stubborn thing. I shouldn't have to do this, F them. I'm gonna, whatever. Hindsight being what it was, I really wish I had, because I was really walking that line. I was in a very dark place, and it just didn't take a lot for me to get even darker. And it's not worth it. These people aren't worth it. They're not worth it. So. Wonder Woman says, yeah, I really miss seeing what my former classmates ate for breakfast. LOL. Yeah, exactly. I mean, really, what are you missing on Facebook? There was a cute quote that I came across the other day that said something like, I hope that your real life is as good as the life you have on Facebook. And I thought that's so true, because that's the other thing is when people, I don't know why, I think everybody kind of falls into this, but you can see your ex's stuff on Facebook and think, oh, they're living the dream. They're living happily ever after. It really was me. And, I should have hung in there and all of this stuff. But you've got to realize that it's a highly edited version of reality. And they're just showing what people post on Facebook, by and large, is the life that they're trying to convince themselves that they live. So it's not, it's the highlight reel. It's the highly edited reel of another person's life. And some people take it to such an extreme that it's really weird. Some people, like for me, I don't go out of my way to stage scenes in order to, I don't do anything just to get the picture, right? Like, I live my life, and if we're taking pictures, it's in the natural flow of things. This is another way society is becoming weird. There's been some people that I've known who they live, like, all they're doing, they're not there. They're not present in the moment. They're only having these certain activities so they can get the picture, so they can post it on Facebook or Instagram. It's weird. And you're sitting there with them and you're trying to have a conversation, or you're trying to just enjoy the night, and they're posing and taking pictures and all of this. And it's just bizarre. Then they get up to go to the bathroom, and you're looking at you're getting all these different alerts, and you're seeing their social media account, and you're there, like, you're sitting there with them, and you're like, what is going on? This is totally not what's been happening at all this whole night. It's weird. Joe says, Dana, I wanted to thank an idea that you shared 2 weeks ago in terms of establishing healthy boundaries, as well as deal breakers that you won't allow. Well, you are so very welcome. It's an absolute game changer, isn't it? When you start realizing what life is authentic to you. And, boundaries and standards are a big part of that. So everything starts to fall into place when you figure out yourself enough, and you make sure that everything's in alignment, that you're in tune with your thoughts, your feelings, your wants, your needs, all of this stuff, and your boundaries and standards. Your standards will raise to meet that, and then your boundaries are like the bodyguard of your standards, and they make sure that those things happen. Very cool how that works. Okay. Let me scroll up here. And you know what? I just realized I did not set a timer on my phone. What is it? It's almost 11. We start at 8:30, 8:30 to 9:30, 9:30 to 10:30, 10:30 to 11:30. So we call it at 11:30. So hold on a second here. I'm going to set a timer. So about 20 minutes, and then we'll go into our guided meditation, and then call it a night. And then hopefully I'll see you guys for book club tomorrow. It's a good, really interesting book. I can't wait to discuss it and hear what everybody has to say about it. Okay, let's see. Let's see if we can get some more questions in. That's well said, Sam. Yeah. He says, yeah, they pour fake and glitter into their social media while we're on a state of total stress. It's very effective to harm us even further, but they're the same virus that we met. Yes. Yes. And Maura says, Dana, I've been using your trick in traffic that they must have explosive diarrhea, and that has helped me and gives me a chuckle. Good. I'm glad. Yeah, that's, life's too short to get caught up with people that have road rage. Oh, okay. Jack says, I missed this. Can you explain? Yes. So I had said before that I no longer, so much of how we perceive or how we react to an event is how we perceive it. And so a really quick way to change how you kind of feel about an event, well, I guess a quick way to change how you react to an event is to change the way that you feel about it. And so I was using the example of road rage, where somebody cuts you off in traffic, or they flip you the finger, or whatever it is. It's really easy to get tangled up in that and to take that personally. But one of the things that I do is I always tell myself, if a person's having road rage, that they are just in such a big hurry because they have explosive diarrhea, and that's why. That's the only explanation, that they have just got to. And then then it's kind of funny because you see their behavior through that lens, and it makes it much easier to just be like, you go, dude, go. I go. It's cool. Go. and not take it personally, because it's not personal to begin with, right? Like they've got something going on. Either they're just always like that, or they were having a rotten day or something, but it's not your fault anyhow that they're acting that way. And then it's kind of funny. You just chuckle to yourself. Jack says, well, Dana, any advice on how to safely navigate social media then? I think it can really help to create an account that's not your real name, where you're using totally different. If you're talking about like getting away from flying monkeys and people that you just don't want to run into, creating a totally different profile with a different name that's, with different pictures. So I'm a big fan of everybody take some time, Google your name, your first name, your last name, see what comes up on the internet. That'll give you a good starting point of like, what other people are going to find out about you. Because what I see a lot of people do is with social media is they'll use the same pictures, they'll change the name, they'll do these different things, but they'll use the same pictures, or then they're going to go befriend the same people. Well, if your accounts are being watched, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to put this together. So then they're saying, oh, well, this new person with, they're going to see your picture, or if it's the same kind of name, if your name is, I don't know, Melissa Smith, and you create an account that says Melissa Smythe, and it's the same picture, they're going to realize that it's you. So, because they can also do an image search with photos, and then any website that you've ever used that photo on is going to come up. So it's just stuff that, again, people who aren't in this position don't have to think about these things, and they don't think about these things. And, but it's important to just realize, the different ways that you can kind of be monitored without wanting to be. And here's the other thing too, like if your friend's profile, if you're not even if they're friends of your friends, if your friend's profile on Facebook is set to open where anybody can see it, then they can also see their friends list. And there's still information that they can get from that. So they can still find you that way, which is why I was saying it's just a good idea to not friend those people. Or if you're going to create a profile, sometimes it can be good to create one of the opposite gender and use completely different photos. So it's like a deep fake account, basically. And then go about letting your friends know that, hey, this is me. And, that helps. Okay. Let's see. And same, Jack, you bring up a good point. He says, Googling my real name doesn't work. I'm actually worse about my electronic trail with this pseudonym. That's another thing. If you tend to use the same, what did they call that? Like login name or screen name for places, then a person can type in your screen name and get, like Jack was saying, then you have this whole electronic tail of all the places that screen name is used. Interesting. Hooray says, Dana, I'm very excited for book club. I have lupus and I wonder if it's because of trauma. I loved the book. It is so interesting when he talks about the different kind of mind-body connection. And I think that there is anything that's inflammation, and it makes sense, right? When you think about it, when our system, stress is such a contributing factor to pretty much everything, to every type of health challenge that a person can have. It just flips all kinds of switches in our bodies, and especially different disorders that are, inflammation is a huge component of them. So any type of, inflammatory disorder like lupus, arthritis, irritable bowel, anything where inflammation and stress can play a part in it. Yeah. I don't know if it necessarily causes it, but I think it definitely doesn't help and can really make it worse. Okay, let's see. Let me scroll up here. Let me check. I think Agatha had sent me quite a few questions. I'm not sure if I got to them or not. I am trying, believe it or not, I really am trying to get better with going through more questions. So, Maura had asked, Dana, do you feel like a lack of self-awareness comes from dealing with this kind of abuse? And how does one cut through this? yeah, I think we kind of covered this earlier, but if you're around a person who's, especially if you grew up with this, where you were continually invalidated. So if a child grows up in an environment where any individuality that they have is not understood, it's not appreciated, and in turn, it's continually invalidated. Let's say you are an artist and you grow up in a home where, I don't know, everybody's engineers, right? There's just kind of this clash of personalities. And if everything that you did is just seen as, well, you can't ever get a job like that, and you need to do something different, and you need to just grow up and this, that, and the other, and in these kind of parts of your personality that they don't agree with are just ground down over time, even if it's well intended. If they're just concerned that, oh, it's just never going to, don't do this, it's never going to go anywhere, kind of a thing. That constant invalidation, when those parts are being ground down, or we're willingly grinding them down because we're believing them, we're like, okay, well, gee, I don't want to, do something that's wrong, so I better listen to them. Then yes, down the road, a person eventually gets to that point of like, I don't know who I am. And it's wild when you start to realize this of, I don't know what my opinions are. I don't know. I'm not comfortable making a decision. I don't know if am I seeing this the right way? And again, that goes back to that needing that external validation, because that's a problem. So if we don't know, if we can't tell the difference between a safe person and an unsafe person, if we can't tell the difference between what's nourishing for us and what's toxic for us, if we can't tell the difference between a comfortable situation and an uncomfortable situation, this is a very vulnerable place for a person to be, because then we're really at the mercy of other people and letting them guide our lives. And even if they're solid people, that can very easily get us off track because they're not us. So yeah, I think that's one of the most challenging things in healing, is for a person to regain their just being grounded in their truth and being okay with that. I mean, and like, I get it. I've been there too, where when you're so hypervigilant and your whole world is blown apart by somebody that you thought you loved and that you thought you knew. And then you question everything, because you're like, well, wait a minute. I always thought the world was this way. And that this toolkit that I had for interacting with people was the way that I went about life. And this situation just blew up. So, because that's where that hypervigilance comes from, because then your brain is freaking out, because your brain its one job is to keep you safe. So if your brain's like, oh my goodness, I have made some like really incorrect connections here, and then it's on overdrive trying to figure out how to keep you safe. That's where all of this like information gathering, this obsessive need to understand narcissism and sociopathy and manipulation and all of this stuff comes from, because your brain is like, hey, you know what? We can't do anything else until we get this figured out, because if this could kill you, this destroyed you emotionally, and next time it could be even worse. So it just goes offline, and it's so focused on figuring this out. So that's why. And then if you don't have people there that are familiar with this, that can help get you grounded and can work through, if you're with somebody that's treating it like this is just a bad breakup, and they don't understand the fractured self that happens after an emotionally and psychologically abusive relationship, it's going to, and if they don't have a healthy understanding of boundary standards and deal breakers, it's going to be very difficult for a person to regain their sense of self. So there's a lot to it. So, yeah. So yes, a person, if you grow up in a home like this, odds are this person's not living their life for them. They're living their life for their parents. They're living their life out of fear. They are not living an authentic life by any stretch. They may or may not realize that. The older they get, they do tend to put these things together. I think, oftentimes we refer to this as like a midlife crisis. I think it's not even about hitting midlife. I think it's you have enough time on this planet and you start, looking around and you have enough things not work out that you start making connections and you just start seeing life very differently. I think that's more of the crisis that we tend to go through. So, and even midlife crisis people, if you go out and you buy your dream car or whatever, it's that realization of, this is my life. There's only so much time I have on this planet. And I really want, what am I waiting for? If I really want this car. I'd been doing what I felt I needed to do this whole time. And now this is, I want to go do, this is what I really want to go do. So this is what I'm really going to go do. So yeah. Okay. Now let me scroll down. People are talking about adrenal fatigue. And Jack had said, talking to Gigi, how did you get diagnosed with adrenal fatigue? I've been told it's a thing, but I don't fully understand all the symptoms. I feel the exact same way. I have heard of, I feel the exact same way. I do believe that it is a thing. It's not something that I've ever heard when I was working as a nurse. I've heard that the term, but that just could be that I had never come across that. I have heard the term adrenal fatigue from like chiropractors and more kind of alternative modalities. I will say that when you are hypervigilant, when you're having anxiety, these kinds of things, adding caffeine to it, I really can't stress this enough. When you add caffeine to an already stressed out system, it's like whipping your adrenal glands. And it's wild, because the old you, before this happened, you might have been able to drink 4 to 6 cups of coffee a day and sleep fine at night and not have any side effects whatsoever. If you're in a state of hyperarousal already, and you even have half a cup of coffee or half a pop, that can send a person into panic attacks. So if your system's already at like that red line and then you add more caffeine to it, even if you just think, oh, it's not that much, it's amazing how much that can send a person over the edge. And I will tell you, that's one thing when I was a psychiatric nurse, time and time and time and time and time again, trying to get people to understand this. Because I get it, nobody really wants to give up their caffeine. And we just think, well, it can't be that big of a deal, right? I've been drinking this my whole life. It's never been a problem. I don't really want to make changes. Like, what am I going to drink if I don't drink coffee, right? Just try it. Switch to decaf pop or coffee or whatever. It can make an ocean of difference when your system's already overstimulated. Soft Breezy Day says, quitting coffee probably saved my life. Yeah, it's such a big thing. I can't tell you how many people used to come in and they're like, I'm having anxiety attacks. It's off the roof. I can't sleep. I'm sweating profusely. I'm feeling like chest pains. I don't know what's going on. And then you start talking to them, and maybe they're even on a bunch of anti-anxiety medication. And then you find out that they drink nothing but caffeine all day, and they're going through a divorce, and maybe they've just lost their job, like major stressful stuff, and saying like, hey, this really does play a part. And I don't think I would have believed it either had I not experienced it. When I was going through nursing school, it was so incredibly stressful. I can't even begin to describe the level of stress. And my friend and I, we would both go to McDonald's in the morning and get a coffee and then head to class. And she was the one that had said, because we were both having anxiety attacks, and they would just come on out of nowhere. Like we could be having lunch and be fine. And then and then she would have one, or we might be in the middle of clinicals and I would have one. Like there was no rhyme or reason for them. They were just happening. And she was the one that was like, I think I'm going to cut out caffeine. I think this is part of the problem. And then a few days later, she's like, yeah, I feel so much better. And then I switched to decaf, and I could not believe the difference. All of those anxiety attacks were gone. So really consider doing that. I'll have to look up more about adrenal fatigue. I know that I've heard a lot of people say, let me write that down, a lot of things about it. And I would like to know more. Adrenal fatigue. Okay. And real quick here, Just Me talks about having difficulty trusting people, otherwise doing well. One of the biggest shifts that so many of us need to make, and let me just share with you something that helped me, was I felt very broken for a very long time because I couldn't trust people the way that I used to. And the way that I used to was immediately trusting people, immediately taking them at face value. And if we had chemistry, being very quick to either get into a relationship with them or really deep, like in theory, what I thought were very deep friendships. And sometimes it worked. It ended, the relationships would be great. And sometimes they were a total train wreck. And after getting tangled up with the relationships that were train wrecks, I was really upset that I couldn't just trust so freely like I used to. And what helped me to understand this now has been the way that I was trusting people before. It was never appropriate. Even though it might be normal, I think most people tend to do that. It doesn't make it healthy. And this goes back to valuing your energy, your time, your inner circle, all of these things. And so taking that pressure off of, it's not appropriate to trust people immediately. Like, trust is something that's earned, it's not given. And it's earned over a period of time with consistent, appropriate behavior. So there's nothing wrong with you if you meet a person and you're at a meetup group or something, and even if you've seen them or hung out with them 3 to 5 times and you don't trust them, there's nothing wrong there. It's you don't know them well enough. And trust is something that's earned. So you're paying attention to, okay, if I tell them something about me, how do they respond to that? Are they showing that they're an emotionally safe person? If I am opening up, if I'm having an opinion, if I say I really want Chinese for lunch instead of pizza, how do they respond to that? Are they making fun of me for my choices? Are they, flexible? Or, how do they respond to you asserting yourself? How do they respond to your boundaries? How do they respond to you sharing deep things about yourself in time, or even little things up front? These things, it makes it so much easier to trust a person when that trust is appropriately earned. And I also say, yes, in the back of your mind, you might still have that concern of waiting for the other shoe to drop, of this person seems like a nice, normal human being, but so did my ex. And so at what point can I just breathe and have faith that they're not abusive, or that they're not going to pull a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. That might be running in the background for you for a little while, but again, it's okay. It might take you, months or even years to get to that place where you're comfortable. But here's the other thing too with that is when you realize that you can trust you, that if somebody does do a 180 and they pull that Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde stuff, and they do show that they're an abuser and that they're not who they led you on to believe, that you can move yourself to safety. So letting our brain know, because before it's like, they kind of got their hooks in us and we were dragged through hell. And, and a lot of that we felt we just needed to hang on. So they were dragging us and we were feeling the need to hang on. Now that you know different, you can do different. And so now that you're like, okay, if things start to really take a sharp left turn, I can leave. And sometimes that helps to relieve that anxiety of holding your breath and waiting for that other shoe to drop. Because the reality is they could be a totally nice, normal, and decent human being, but then something might happen down the road. They become an alcoholic. These things happen. So then it's sort of just knowing, where your deal breakers and how to assert yourself and all of these things are. And it's like, okay, well, if this happens, I'm not going to lie awake about it. If this happens down the road, then I'm going to address it somehow, some way. We're either going to work towards a solution or I'm going to need to go my own way. Okay, so I guess let's do real quick. There's another, you guys bring up so much interesting stuff in the chat. Jack is talking about the stomach is a second brain, and there's a lot of hormones and probiotic bacteria that do a lot and remember a lot. I was just watching a video not too long ago about that exact same thing, and that's absolutely fascinating. That chemicals that scientists originally thought were only in the brain. I think serotonin was one, and there's quite a few they're now finding are also produced in our stomach. And then you kind of wonder, well, what are the effects? Have they done studies with people that have had gastric bypass? Like, how has that affected them? I would just be curious to know, like, what kind of behavior changes have they noticed, if any? And I don't know, the human body is just fascinating. So, okay. So with that said, yes, let's do our guided imagery for the night. And then I'll see you guys tomorrow, 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, book club. The body keeps the score, be there or be square. So I'll see you guys tomorrow. We'll do our guided imagery. So find a comfortable spot. If you are able to lay down or if you are in a chair, taking some time to just settle in, being present in this moment. Let's do a series of 7 deep breaths. Slowly in through your nose and slowly out through your mouth. With each breath in, drawing that oxygen deeper down into the bases of your lungs, allowing your chest to fully expand, and easily and effortlessly exhaling. Taking some time to settle in, whether you're laying down or you're sitting, feeling the weight of your body as you continue to breathe. Now turning your attention inward until you can feel your heartbeat. Now bringing your attention up to your neck, down to your wrists, down to your ankles. Feeling your blood circulate through all these different pulse points in your body. Seeing if you can bring your attention to each of these different areas, and if you can feel your heart, your pulse, the beating in each of these different areas. And just acknowledging what an amazing gift it is to have this body and to have the health that we do have. And just acknowledging that your body does so many things for you every single moment of every single day. And what a gift that is. That your heart beats and your blood pumps and you're able to take in oxygen and cells regenerate, and there is so much going on inside of you. Your body's hard at work, healing and repairing you, even as you sleep. And truly understanding that in every single moment of every single day, that you are healing. Your body and your brain are on your side, even if sometimes it doesn't feel like it, but they really truly are. And continuing to breathe. Being fully present in this moment. And if you find your mind pulling you into the future or pulling you into the past, just gently bring it back to this moment. This is your time to just be fully present, to be here. There's lots of other time to think about the past or to think about the future, but right now, it's okay to set all that down and just be here. So now bring your attention up to the top of your forehead. And as we slowly move our attention down, releasing any tension, stress, or anxiety that might present itself. Relaxing your eyebrows, your eyes, your cheeks, your mouth and your jaw. Letting your tongue fall from the roof of your mouth. Feeling how it feels to completely relax your face Relaxing your neck, your shoulders, letting them become heavy and drop down as that tension and stress just melts away. Relaxing your chest, allowing it to open and expand. Relaxing your arms, your forearms, your hands and your fingers. Letting your arms fall into whatever position is the most comfortable for you. Relaxing your stomach. And as we're doing this, just noticing the difference of when you're bringing your awareness to these different parts of your body that are storing any stress or tension, and how they feel, and then how they feel afterwards when you're releasing that. Just unclenching your stomach, relaxing your hips, letting your legs fall into whatever position is the most comfortable for you. Relaxing your thighs, your calves, your feet and your toes. Letting your legs become heavy as you let them fully relax. Now feel the weight of your entire body as you let any remaining stress or tension just easily and effortlessly just melt away. And continuing to breathe. Now turning your attention inward, visualizing a white light inside of you. It's a soft, comforting glow. It's that healing, restorative light. And every breath that you take in, visualize that light growing larger till it expands the size of your chest cavity, down into your arms, your hands, your fingers, down into your hips, your thighs, your calves, your feet, and your toes. Feeling that light, that beautiful healing light as it fills up your body, embracing every single cell, playing a major part in healing and restoring you. And that every single moment of every single day, you truly are healing. Visualize this light expanding past the barrier of your skin, perhaps 1 or 2 inches outside of your body, to the point where you can't really tell where your body starts and stops. You can feel your energy moving past the barrier of your skin. Feeling this light this restorative healing light, knowing that it's within you and it connects you to everything good and right and healing within you, and everything that's good and right and healing within the world. That it's always there within you. Let's take some time now to think about all of the different things. Let's list 7 different things. So think about 7 different things. Maybe it's people, maybe it's places, maybe it's things that just bring joy or value to your life. Could be a pet, it could be a favorite place, could be the sound of the waves at the beach, it could be the gift of hot, clean water, the health that you do have, the wisdom that you do have, the healing that you do have. There is so much to be thankful and grateful for. Even in times like these, it is truly so important that we acknowledge that there is still good in us and in our lives and in the world. And if you'd like to take a few breaths now, let's just send some of this light and love out into the world. Maybe it's directed at certain people that really provide joy to your life. Perhaps it's to people that are in the chat tonight, or perhaps it's just sending out that positive energy out into the world for whoever might need it. So let's take 3 breaths now, just sending light and love out. Now let's take a moment and send some of that light and love back to yourself. Just acknowledging how far you've come, that you are a warrior, and that you are wise and you are brave, and that there are so many things that are right about you. There really, truly are. And when you're ready, come on back and open your eyes. Okay, so thank you everybody for being here tonight. And we will do book club tomorrow night, 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I hope to see you then. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much for joining me. And as always, lots of love to you guys. You are not alone. You are not crazy. And you really can move forward and heal from this. So take care. Light and love to you. Good night.